Hello. Hi, friends. I'm just typing in this caption for today's talk. Good to see you here. Thanks for joining us. Hello, hello. Thanks, everybody, for hopping on. We're going to get started in a little while. In a few minutes, I'm just typing in our pinned comments so that you know what we're talking about today. Thanks for joining us. It's hard for me to know how many M's in commemorative. Thanks so much for tuning in. We hope you stick around. Hi, Adam. Welcome to the game. We're going to get started in a few minutes. Thanks for joining us.
Foi o primeiro produto da Pronto que eu comprei esse. Uma só. Resistente à água, não é prova.
Hola, welcome. Thanks for tuning in, friends. Oh, you guys, my caption is too long for this. Hey, Jewel Addy, my caption is too long. Let's see if I can. Oh, hey.
Hey, Ben.
Hey, Marshun, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
I'm living it up in the city, as I like to say. How are
where,
you?
where are you?
I live in DuPont Circle.
Oh, okay.
How about you?
I'm on the other side. I'm in Rockville.
Okay,
Yeah.
that's fun.
Yeah.
How long have you been there?
I recently just moved here, so everything is still kind of new to me, but I like Rockville because it's close to the city, but not in the city. So it's like I have that separation.
Yes, that is
Yeah.
that is the in the city but not of the city kind of thing that I'm looking for.
Right. How long have you been in DuPont?
We've been here for 3 years.
Mm-hmm.
Me and my cat and my partner.
Yes,
Um,
cat.
you might see her. She likes to wander in whenever I'm talking to anybody on video. It's really weird.
Okay.
Y'all, my mom has joined. Hey, Mom.
I'm just so happy you were able to pin the comment because I have the hardest time. Always.
I struggled to type it in. I struggled to do everything, but I'm here by the grace of God. I'm
Yes.
Okay. What are we talking about today?
Oh, we're gonna really get into some things today, Ben. I don't think they're ready for all this information they're about to get from us. But first, I'll introduce myself for everyone who's first time tuners. My name is Marshun. I'm the Instagram Live OG here at Whitman-Walker. My pronouns are he and she, and I'm a community outreach specialist here at Whitman-Walker. And during the past few months, Whitman-Walker's community health department team has expanded its outreach efforts to the social media platform. We cover various topics about HIV, STI, sexual health practices, access to care, social determinants of health, and general public health interventions. Our series of outreach sessions also focus on the current pandemic, COVID-19, and ways you can manage your sexual, personal, and mental health. The community health team is here to educate and help you. So I want to thank everyone for joining us today. You asked what we're going to talk about. So our conversation today is about the update on 3 cases in the Supreme Court that have big consequences for the LGBTQ people. And to help us lead the conversation today, we have Ben Brooks, the OG, the Assistant Director of Policy here at Whitman-Walker, joining us. And, let's get started. And everyone, feel free to chime in, jump in the comments. I'll make sure I'm checking the comments because you may have questions that come up during all of this. So, Ben, thanks for joining us. How are you? Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Thanks. I'm happy to be here. So my name is Ben Brooks, as you say. I use he, him pronouns, and I am the Assistant Director of Policy at Whitman-Walker. So what that really looks like is that I get the pleasure of working with people across all of Whitman-Walker's departments to try to gather the evidence to educate people outside of Whitman-Walker, mostly government officials, about what they can do to improve the health for LGBT people and people living with or at risk for HIV. I'm so thankful to work at Whitman-Walker that we get to do things like this.
Yay.
Talk to people.
Okay. Well, before we get into discussion of policy around sexual orientation and gender, Ben, can you help us establish some definitions for these terms? Because I know a lot of people may not necessarily know what we're discussing.
Yeah, and especially because we're going to talk about law today, and the courts really care about the words that you use, and so the definitions are really important. So I'm going to start. So we're talking about laws around sexual orientation and gender identity. So sexual orientation is defined by GLAAD, and my notes are over here, but I'm talking to you over here. So sexual orientation is defined by GLAAD, which is the media organization, as the scientifically accurate term for an individual's enduring physical, romantic, and or emotional attraction to members of the same or opposite sex, right? Of course, we know same, opposite, all of the sexes, including, of course, the regular sort of 4 LGB and heterosexual. So those are your 4 big buckets: lesbian, gay, bisexual, and heterosexual. So then gender identity is defined by the National Center for Trans Equality as your internal knowledge of your gender, your knowledge and understanding of yourself as a man, a woman, or any other gender. In contrast, right, gender expression are these sort of outward facing, the way that we present ourselves to the world, which I'm sure is something that we're all familiar with, right? Everything is drag, right?
Yes, we love it.
Good. So I want to be clear because in the LGBT community, we celebrate the differences, right? And our community, especially in Washington, D.C., is full of gender variant and sexuality variant people who have different races, different ages, different places of countries that they come from, different socioeconomic statuses, different health needs. And so for us at Whitman-Walker, understanding the intersections is really how we meet people where they are, right? And I think that's pretty much it. So, but I do want to say, while we're getting started, this law stuff is intentionally confusing on purpose, right? It's built to be a barrier to people. So what I want you to do is interrupt me as soon as something doesn't make sense.
Yes. And like I said, everyone tuning in, feel free to interrupt us at any time. Ask us as many questions. You can ask us 100 questions. We don't care. If you have a question about something, we're here to help you and educate you so you understand what's going on. And I know a lot of this is confusing. I don't know a lot about this, but Ben is here to help us both. Okay.
I'm a lawyer, so I'm going to try not to add to the problem.
Yes. Okay. Okay, so Ben, my first question for you today is, what's going on in the Supreme Court right now?
Okay, so in the summer, the Supreme Court drops their decisions, right? So we call it decision season. Other people call it summer. But what happens so far is that we've seen cases about immigrants' rights, about gun control, and about presidential powers, but we're waiting for 3 cases in particular about the rights for LGBTQ people to have protections from the federal government at work, right? So we're watching to determine how the court is going to interpret a set of laws called Title VII, and whether they're going to interpret the words sex discrimination to include sexual orientation and gender identity. So our conversation today is really going to get into the meat of what goes into that kind of decision.
Okay. So do we have protections at work for LGBTQ individuals, or are we just kind of like just thrown in there, no type of rights, no nothing, we're just in there?
It depends where you live. It turns out, so in Washington, D.C., and Maryland and Virginia, where I hope most of our viewers are, there are protections for LGBTQ people at work. And so you are able to be out at work and you are protected from being discriminated against because of your sexual orientation or gender identity. That's from the state laws, right?
Okay.
And so what we are working on is on the national level, though, protections at work come from this law, Title VII. And so, like I said, the arguments are, does the word sex include sexual orientation and gender identity? And one of the things that's interesting about these cases to me is that it's not just about work for these cases. The courts use the way that we interpret Title VII to interpret a lot of other civil rights laws, especially, and for example, including Title IX, which is about discrimination at school, and the Affordable Care Act's protections under the Healthcare Rights Law, Section 1557, which are about the protections from discrimination when you are receiving health care. And so we really need to be paying attention to, well, and working toward making sure that that Title VII laws are covering LGBTQ people, because it can really make a difference in housing and education and healthcare, which are some of the biggest places that people need protection just to be able to live their life.
Yes, comfortably, right?
Yeah.
So
So
why do judges and lawyers assume that we just, automatically have these protections when, we get hired at a job?
So that's a good question, because this is about history, which
Right.
I think is important. And so what happened since 2012, under the Obama administration, the government agency in charge of making sure people are not discriminated against at work, is called the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, right? Where you want to see the EEOC.
Oh,
so
yes.
In 2012, the EEOC wrote a memo saying that the law under Title VII protected people based on sexual orientation and gender identity. So they actually brought one of the cases that we're going to talk about today. But when the Trump administration came in, they tried to reverse that policy. Let's call it a policy because that's a good word for it. And they actually then, interesting, here comes my cat, y'all. Interestingly, they removed themselves as the party bringing the case and switched sides to argue against their previous position, which is wild to me. So that is why a lot of lawyers and judges even think that LGBTQ people have these protections, and the most clear way of saying that really is that they have a different interpretation of the law than the Trump administration does.
Exactly. So it looks like we have a question, our first question. MK with the hair said, what else? I have a lot on my phone so I can barely see. What else would it be covering under the word sex discrimination?
That's a good question, and we can talk a little bit more about that later, but sex discrimination also covers protections for sexual harassment at work, and that's not something that was originally in the law, but something that the court read into the words because of sex, that people were being sexually harassed at work. and they didn't have any recourse to it. And so when they would bring cases, the court said, well, it's not really there. And then the Supreme Court said, actually, if you look at it, like harassment for sexual favors is because of sex. Like it's not because of your sex at birth. It's because of like this like a sexual thing, but it fit inside the language as they were reading it.
And
that's a great question.
And of course they looked at it like that. So then why should our communities and ally communities care about these decisions, even if they don't identify it under the LGBTQ scope?
That's a really interesting question. So discrimination against LGBTQ people is persistent and systemic across our country, right? Whitman-Walker's patients and clients tell us of many instances of discriminatory attitudes, mistreatment, and harassment when trying to receive health care and in other settings. But discrimination in employment, what we're talking about today, it is harmful to LGBTQ people's mental and physical health as well as their economic well-being. So if you work with LGBTQ people, if you sell stuff to LGBTQ people, if you're a boss to an LGBTQ person, everything that you care about in terms of your business or your friend's health and well-being really matters for these cases. And it's really important, especially for transgender people. Transgender folks in the United States are twice as likely to experience poverty over the general population, and they face pervasive workplace discrimination when seeking employment, as well as elevated levels of workplace harassment. And all of these numbers come from a 2015 survey. And so we hope that we've made progress in the last 5 years, but other data under the Trump administration really shows that Trump has had a bad impact on rates of harassment and violence against transgender people. So it's especially important now that we protect trans people from discrimination in the workplace. Just sort of to finish up on this thought, recognition from the federal law means that LGBTQ people can access the federal courts to hold their employers accountable to having fair treatment, and a favorable ruling, right, would cement the obligations of the federal government too, not just the courts, but the rest of it, the EEOC, the Department of Justice, to be a helping hand in support of LGBTQ people instead of, like the Trump administration is unfortunately right now, on the other side of the debate.
Right, because I believe they reversed it, correct?
Yes, they reversed their position.
Yeah. So basically all of our friends and allies need to pull up because this is something that's important to us and it should be important to everyone.
Yes.
So, Ben, what exactly are these cases about you mentioned?
Oh my God. I'm so glad you asked. Okay, so the cases are about whether the law recognizes LGBTQ people's rights, right? But like your right to not being fired or promoted or not being hired or mistreated at work just because of your sexual orientation or your identity. But they're really about whether you can be out at work, whether you can talk about your partner, whether you can wear the clothes you want to wear, whether you can just be your queer self at work, right? And Whitman-Walker, we have a value of bringing your whole self to work because we know that that's important for each of us to be in community that way. And so this is really central and core to our values. I want to use sort of this, legally speaking, I want to sort of get this in. There are two questions. So is discrimination based on an individual's sexual orientation a form of sex discrimination? All right, that's the sexual orientation question. And then the transgender one is discrimination against someone because they are transgender discriminating against them because of sex? And that's the gender identity one, right? So it's kind of, those are the two legal questions, but it's really about whether you can be yourself.
Right, ultimately.
Yeah.
Okay, so who are these cases about and who's telling their story and sharing like their personal experiences of discrimination? Because I know that that's really kind of heartbreaking for individuals to go through that. So it's like, who's hearing about all this? Who's telling these stories? Like, how do we know about this?
Yeah. So that's a really important question because the people that bring the cases really inform the law too. And so one of the, again, history is important here, and our legal advocates have to make important and careful decisions when they choose which plaintiffs to bring the cases. So for our I offer my thanks to these people for taking the brave stand to be out in front for us, because this could make a difference to a lot of folks. So there are three people. The sexual orientation cases, the LGB cases, as I call them, are brought by two gay men. The first one was Donald Zarda, and Donald worked as a skydiving instructor and was fired after he mentioned at work that he was gay while strapped to a female customer, right? So he was trying to be like, oh, don't worry, I'm gay. Like, this is no big deal. And his employer claimed that he shared inappropriate information with customers about his personal life. So I'm shocked, right?
Okay.
So the second one is even worse to me, but so Gerald Bostock.
I knew you. Even worse.
Even worse. And the third one's even worse. So, but Gerald worked as an award-winning child welfare services coordinator for a county in Georgia, and he, in 2013, he joined a gay baseball league and started really promoting this child welfare volunteer opportunity through his job with his baseball friends. And it turned out that that didn't sit well with people. He was later started being investigated. People started bringing up questions about his conduct, and they eventually fired him. Again, he wasn't even at work, right? He was doing something good. He was volunteering.
Off the clock.
So the third one is about a woman named Amy Stevens, and Amy Stevens worked for 6 years at a funeral home and then came out as transgender to her boss and started wearing her woman-presenting clothes at work, and her boss fired her. And it really is just as clear as that. So I want to say two things. That Amy Stevens died really recently, a couple of weeks ago, and Donald Zarda passed away in 2014 from a base jumping accident. So neither of them are here in person to witness the final determination of their cases, but we say that they'll be with us in spirit, and their cases continue to be brought by their families.
Yeah, and I think that we should maybe have like a moment of silence just to pay our respects to them and their courageous acts. So just gonna do a quick moment of silence. Okay. Ben, it just amazes me how employers just associate your work performance with your orientation. Like, where's the comparison? Like, it's just mind blowing. Like, I just don't understand. It's disgusting.
It's just bias, right? It's taught discrimination.
It's crazy. But Ben, why are these cases so important to us today?
Yeah. So like we talked about before, it's important because we don't have federal protections, right? We have it's important because the way that the court interprets these laws, like we said before, impacts our access to housing, to access to credit, even like our access to banking services, our access to housing services, our access to education, our access to healthcare. All of these have really similar legal frameworks under the Civil Rights Act, right? They all come from this same root. And so when you interpret it in a certain way, that interpretation spreads throughout the entire tree. There we go. There's a nice metaphor. Really quickly. So, but it's really important because this opportunity to settle once and for all, right? Congress didn't put it in explicitly yet. We can talk about that later. But the Supreme Court has the opportunity to kind of settle it once and for all across the whole nation. And the reason why it's important that it's across the whole nation is because only about half of the nation's estimated 8.1 million LGBTQ people have access to these employment protections, and that's on the state level, right? So weirdly, 45% of Americans believe incorrectly that we have these protections already, right? So it's time to do this, especially for LGBTQ people living in the South. It's very important, and I'm from Georgia, and I still think DC is the South, so this is near and dear to my heart. But only about 18% of LGBTQ people living in the South are covered by non-discrimination laws, and as opposed to about 89% of LGBTQ people living in the North are covered by these laws, right? So it doesn't make sense for, as a nation, for it depend on where you live for what your rights are, right? And so I think that we can agree that that is not a situation that makes sense or something that we want to encourage. So it's important for us to settle this once and for all, so that we can move forward with our country. We're clearly in a place where we're ready to move on from some of these historical ills.
Yes, we're trying to climb up the hill, not go back down.
Amen.
And I'll actually check in. I believe we had one question.
Yes.
So JJ asks, do these cases only appeal to workplace discrimination, or do they extend to other areas? I can't see because of the line. Like, what? I can't see the word. Hold on. Is like as consumers.
Interesting. So technically, right, the cases apply to workplace protections, but as JJ kind of gets at, what are your rights when you're a person that goes into a business to do business there, right? This is a cases we've seen about people trying to buy wedding cakes, right? Like gay people trying to get married. And so what we think, because there are civil rights laws that apply to what are called public accommodations, which are just businesses that put themselves out there as businesses for anybody to go into. And so these cases would mean that those protections would apply to places of public accommodations. So yeah, it would protect consumers. Now, I want to be clear, it's not a done deal, because the idea is that you are giving a signal about how the court will interpret the law in a different situation. And as we'll see, the court likes to narrowly rule on what the situation is in front of them.
Right.
But it probably is my answer.
Yeah. I'm saying it's like they kind of just pick and choose what's best for them.
They pick and choose what's best for all of us, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Or what they think is best for all of us.
Yeah, they think. So I know a little bit about the Title 8 protects. I know a little bit about Title 8, and it protects employers from discriminating against us. Although, could you talk a little bit more about that for individuals who don't necessarily know exactly what it is?
Yeah. So I think you mean Title 7 is
I'm sorry.
No, it's fine.
I'm in Title 7. I'm so sorry. Yeah, Title 7.
No apologies necessary. So the legislation was passed originally in 1964, which was like today, right after years of protests and marches by Black civil rights groups, including the March on Washington for Jobs and Freedom. So I just want to note, we get rights after we march. And this is why I'm very excited about these days that we are going through right now.
Absolutely.
So Title VII is of 11 titles, but includes employment protections against discrimination based on sex, race, color, religion, and national origin. Okay? So in later years, more and more things were added on to these rights, and that's because people really understood the framework of civil rights law and were able to add to it and build on it, which worked really well. So it's been interpreted by the courts since 1964, right? Like we talked about earlier, sex turned out to also mean sexual harassment, right? Which is awesome, because we need to be protected from sexual harassment in the workplace.
Absolutely.
But each advancement takes years of advocacy and public education, which is why it's taken more than 50 years for us to get to LGBTQ rights. So they decided first that sexual harassment against women was covered, and then they had to have a separate case that decided that sexual harassment by men against men was also included, which is good that they should do that. They're slow movers. And then one of them, thank you for laughing. One of the most foundational cases that these cases today really sits on is a case called Price Waterhouse that established that discriminating against somebody because they didn't conform to your stereotypes about what you think women or men should act like is discrimination based on sex, which is great because a lot of our society's nastiness comes from people not like thinking you're going to act a certain way and you do what you want, and they don't like that. So this is a real good protection against stereotypes, which I think is really helpful.
Absolutely. Yes. So then what exactly do lawyers for the LGBTQ clients argue exactly when they do have these cases?
Yeah. So there are three arguments in the sexual orientation cases, and they are basically arguing that discriminating against a gay man because he's gay is discriminating against him because of sex, because if he was a woman attracted to a man, you wouldn't have a problem with it, right?
Right.
So that's because of sex. If he is discriminated against because his partner is a man, then that's discrimination based on the sex of his partner, which is discrimination on the basis of sex. It's also infringing on his First Amendment rights to freedom of association, which I think is interesting and fun, because your employer can't discriminate against you if you're a white person with a black partner, right? Which is a different case, Loving versus Virginia. There's a movie if you want to watch that one. And then the third case is he is discriminated against because he doesn't comply with his employer's stereotypes about who a man should be partnered with, right? And that's exactly going to this Price Waterhouse case that we talked about earlier. Okay, so those are the sexual orientation. Those are the gay guys. So Miss Stevens, Amy was her name. There are two arguments for the lawyers on this side, which is that the employer didn't like her female sex, or the fact that she changed her sex, which of course is right there, discrimination on the basis of sex, right? And then the second one is that Mrs. Stevens violated the employer's stereotypes about what somebody assigned male at birth should do with their body, right? So again, it's getting to that stereotype question. It's a really powerful argument.
Okay. So what exactly do lawyers do for business? What exactly do lawyers for the businesses argue when they come into contact with this?
So the lawyers for the other side, because the businesses are arguing that they didn't break the law, right? And so
right.
the businesses are arguing kind of three things. The first is that Congress did not intend for Title VII to cover sexual orientation or gender identity. There are lots of ways of countering that argument, but the first is that the language of the statute says sex, and in our modern minds, sexual orientation and gender identity are about sex. So
right.
it covers it, right? So the second one is that discrimination against the homosexual person is not discrimination because of sex, it's discrimination because of homosexuality, which I just kind of have to laugh at because I'm not a theoretical homosexual. I'm a practicing homosexual, right? Like, this is about what I do with my body that you have a problem with. So it's difficult for me to not laugh at that argument. And then the last one is kind of like in law we call it a public policy argument, which is like the world would be turned upside down if gay and trans people had rights at their jobs, which is crazy. First off, because we talked about this, about half of Americans think gay and trans people have rights at their jobs already, right? It's already a thing that lots of people think is happening. And in many states, it's already a thing that's happening. And so it wouldn't be that disruptive because this is already what the world looks like in a lot of places. So I want to take a moment to say one more thing about the arguments. My boss, shout out to Dan Bruner, who is my fabulous mentor and boss. He listened to the arguments and seemed to note that the Supreme Court justices were really intrigued with questions of dress codes and bathrooms, right? And I just want to note that these issues about dress codes and bathrooms were not what the court was asking in these cases. And so these questions are distractions, but also these questions have been distractions from the actual and persistent problems of violence and discrimination that transgender people experience throughout their lives, and we shouldn't let them be distractions in the court of law, right? Because it's not about dress codes and bathrooms.
It has nothing to do with it.
Nothing to do with it. And like in the court, there were transgender people using the bathroom on that day, and the sky did not fall. So like,
yes.
Thought about bathrooms.
Let me check in to see if we have any questions. Nope, looks like we're good.
All right, I've confused everybody. That's good sign.
They're gonna have a million questions after this. Okay, Ben. So I appreciate that. It's just you're helping me to understand this more. Just because maybe I don't know. Like I just looked at lawyers as just helping an individual rather than the community as a whole. So I'm just glad to know that here at Whitman-Walker we have lawyers who are really just fighting for the equality of everyone, and that's just amazing.
Thank you. Well, and the lawyers at Whitman-Walker Legal Services are the people that do the real daily work of making sure that people can access their health insurance, that they're able to get the care that they need, that they're not discriminated in their workplace. And because these laws can be on the books, but unless you have somebody to fight for you, then it doesn't make a difference. So I really shout out to Whitman-Walker's Legal Services, and I really encourage people to reach out to them if you have a problem with your job or with somebody discriminating against you in any place in Washington, D.C., Virginia, or Maryland.
Absolutely. And we have a number you can reach us at the bottom. We've pinned it in case you have any questions in regards to legal services, healthcare, anything. Okay, Ben. Okay. So
well, I wanna shout out. I wanna talk about what happens because I'm an advocate, right? I'm about how do we fix this for everybody in one fell swoop. So I want to talk about what happens if we win, if we lose.
Okay.
Okay. So if we win, we're gonna have a party.
Absolutely. It's your house with your cat.
In my house with my cat. The club alphabet is open, baby. That's what I call my house. Okay. So, but if we lose, what happens next? So if we lose on the federal level, we need to pass the Equality Act through the Senate, right? We heard about the Equality Act. It passed the House in 2019. It protects sex, sexual orientation, gender identity. It applies to beyond just employment, but to housing, to taxes, to credit, to healthcare, everything, right? And so even jury duty. The other thing that we're going to do on the state level, right, is that if you live in a state that doesn't have these protections, you can be an advocate in your own state to your state representatives because this is a time of change. We are living in a time of rapid change. Virginia just passed these laws this past year or just in the last year or so, just flipped their legislature and were able to pass these laws. It's fantastic. So that's federal and state, but on the individual level, companies can make good non-discrimination policies and hold themselves accountable, and their employees can hold them accountable. So you as an individual have a lot of power to make change in your own company and in your own community by advocacy. And we're seeing a lot of accountability these days. It's been an interesting time, and I think that there's somebody out there that's eagerly waiting for us to invite them to build a better world, and I really truly think that it's a good time for that.
Yes, I agree with that. It looks like we just need to continue advocacy and fighting for equality for everyone across the LGBTQ community span, just because it's something that we all battle with. And I've been discriminated before from an employer. I haven't been terminated, although I have been rolled up before for, I don't remember what it was, but it was something. We're not going to talk about that now because I don't want to call any people out there. But
when we're not on the internet,
right? I just want to remind everyone, Whitman-Walker remains committed not only to providing welcoming, affirming, high quality healthcare to everyone, but also working towards a truly, truly inclusive society that provides the opportunity for everyone to thrive regardless of their sexual orientation, gender identity, race, immigration status, or other protected statuses. At Whitman-Walker, our healthcare providers, lawyers, policy advocates, educators, and researchers will continue to fight for the equality and equity for everyone. And we are here for you.
Amen. Yeah.
I'm gonna just scroll through to see if we have any questions. Register to vote. Yes. Register to vote. Yes, register to vote. I want to thank you, Ben, for joining us today. I'm sure you've helped educate a lot of people on what's going on in the world and different policies. Shout out to the legal team once again for always holding it down. And for those of you who are still tuned in, be sure to follow us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter at Whitman-Walker. And for the most up-to-date information, feel free to check out our website for more content. And also be sure to check out our youth team on Instagram at RealTalkDC_. Once again, Ben, thanks for joining me. I hope you have a wonderful evening. And if anyone has any questions, feel free to reach us at the number we pinned below. And shout out to the legal team. We stand.
Thank you, Marshun. I just want to address somebody. I think I may have been misspoken. Somebody has issue with my metaphor, and I want to say the sky did not fall when transgender people used the restroom, and that's the point I was trying to make, that it was not an issue. So I hope that that's clear, and I just want to thank everybody for joining us, and it was really fun hanging out with you, Marshun, and I hope we get to do it again soon.
Yeah, Ben, and thanks for correcting that and clearing that up. And I hope to see you soon. I hope you stay safe and have a wonderful evening.
You too. Have a good night. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.